That's to join. Okay, great. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another webinar hosted by the Greenwich Hospital Medical Library. My name is Veronica Blanken, and I'm the Consumer Health Librarian at Greenwich Hospital. So viewers may already know that nutrition is a really important part of having a healthy lifestyle. What may not be as well known, however, is the impact, the dramatic impact that just being mindful of what you eat can have on the process of aging. We all know that as we get older, things are not working as well as we did when we were younger. But just from what I've researched for this webinar, it's fascinating to me how just taking care of what you eat, being more mindful about it can help you reduce the risk of developing any chronic conditions that might occur as we get older. And in order to go over the intricacies of that, I'm happy to be joined by Erica Christ, the outpatient dietitian and certified diabetes educator working at the Center for Behavioral and Nutritional Health in Greenwich. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Erica.
Thank you for having me.
And we are going to, for the first time in this webinar series, allow people to be asking questions during the webinar. So if while we're talking or speaking, if you have a question for either myself or Erica tonight, please feel free to ask using the features, either the chat or the Q&A buttons in the Zoom toolbar on your screens. And if you received a handout that I emailed to you a few hours prior to tonight's webinar, all the links on that PDF are clickable. So all the links that we're sharing tonight, all the websites that I'm going over, you are able to click on those on that PDF that I sent out earlier. So let's get started without further ado. And again, if you have any questions, just use the chat or the Q&A feature. So before we get started, I'd like to just make a brief disclaimer. This presentation is for educational and informational purposes only. Please always consult your doctor or other healthcare provider for medical advice before making any lifestyle decisions that may impact your health. And all the images used in this webinar are sourced from reliable health websites or under the Creative Commons digital license, which means that they are free to use. So a brief overview of how tonight's webinar will go. I will begin with introductions of myself and Erica. Erica and myself will go over why healthy eating matters as we age. I will be sharing some nutritional intake for adults. I will be showing where to find that information. Resources for more adult nutrition information so that you can actually educate yourself after the presentation by just simply going online. And we're not going to be recommending Google, just Google, but we can use Google to get to those sites. There are also websites that I will be sharing for finding healthy recipes and where to actually look for nutritionists in your area. Resources for avoiding food poisoning scams and diet fads. And last but not least, Erica, being most familiar with this, will be sharing a little bit about what the Center for Nutritional Behavioral Health in Greenwich actually offers its patients. So starting with myself, hello again, I'm Veronica and I'm the Consumer Health Librarian. For those who may not know who that is someone who is able to evaluate, share, and find any type of health information that is requested, whether that be for looking up a medication or a diagnosis or information about an upcoming surgery. Basically anything that you don't have time to look up on your own or your healthcare provider doesn't have time to explain to you. You can request information from me to look up for you. And in doing so, I have achieved a master's in library science, and I also possess consumer health certification from the Medical Library Association. So I am pretty good at doing those things. And I am a Greenwich resident myself, and therefore I really care about the health information needs of the people in this community. And I'm hoping that in doing so, I can help people become more informed and educated about their healthcare needs. And now I have a slide about Erica. Erica, would you like to share a bit about yourself for our viewers tonight?
Yeah, I just realized this was a pretty short slide compared to yours.
Yeah. But that's where you come in. You just fill in the blanks.
Been working at Greenwich Hospital as the outpatient dietitian for the past 20 years. I finished school and got my license as a licensed registered dietitian from Columbia University and got my first job at Greenwich Hospital and never left. My dual master's is in exercise physiology and nutrition education, and I love fitness as well, and wellness and disease prevention and management. I am a Pilates instructor as well, and my passion is really in wellness and making sure that we can do all that we can through lifestyle changes and being the best that we can through, or the healthiest that we can through food and fitness and sleep, and getting the best that we can to prevent disease, treatment through the support of nutrition and fitness as well. Prevention is really the key. And then when there is a diagnosis, how do we manage that in addition to the medical support we get from our caregivers, how nutrition and fitness can play a role, because it does play a role, tremendous role. So I've spent the past 20 years supporting the patients and the community, our community here, in education and treatment.
It's always a good sign when the RD that might be treating you or helping through it is so passionate about the subject herself. Do you specialize in a specific area of nutrition and fitness, or and you're open to patients of all ages and such, or is there something you specifically specialize in?
My passion now, my specialization is in anti-inflammatory diet and healing, injury prevention and treatment of pre and post-operative surgery, as well as healing from injuries, as well as other orthopedic types of diagnoses. I realize that as we get older and as I get older, so I've noticed over the past 20 years, we as providers, I believe, we learn a lot in school, but through our own education, but as we go through our own personal experiences, we learn so much more as we experience things. So my passions become deeper as I experience things. So for example, I recently had an orthopedic procedure, so I was able to get a better handle on my own recovery through certain types of dietary changes and fitness changes to help me to heal faster and get out of pain very quickly. So things like that, as we age and experience new things, the more we can use ourselves sort of as experiments, so to speak, through nutrition and fitness. It's really quite fascinating and fun. Being a certified diabetes educator as well for the past 15 years, of course, blood glucose control and weight management has always been a specialty of mine as well.
Very thorough, and I totally agree with the perspective of the medical professional, including their own experience into their practice. It's definitely it helps the patients identify with you more. So that's really great to hear. So thank you for the intro, and we're just going to go into providing the context as why nutrition, especially in the ages of 50 and up, are so important. As I was doing research for this webinar, and Erica can tell me if I'm missing anything, but I've seen that aging is linked to a variety of bodily changes, and there's some of you in the audience who might know exactly what I'm talking about. These include muscle loss, thinner skin, less stomach acid, bone and joint weakness, decreased brain function, and reduced hunger and thirst signs. And the parts that I have in parentheses, sarcopenia is apparently the term for muscle loss. And some of these things I also have just points as to why that's an issue as we're eating as we get older, because if you have less stomach acid, you cannot absorb certain nutrients in the body, or if you have thinner skin as we get older, you cannot obtain as much vitamin D from sunlight. And obviously, I think a lot of people, especially women, unfortunately, are aware that osteoporosis is a very common health condition that can arise from healthy aging. And so these are the relevant sources that I've gotten these points from. But Erica, can you comment on any of these and tell us what is most common among people, among all these bodily changes?
Well, I think one thing to start thinking about is the list that you have here. These changes, while they start a lot earlier than the age of 50. So take, for example, osteoporosis. Our bones peak at the age of about 30. And a lot of people don't realize that. So once we hit the age of 30, from there, we begin bone loss. And so we have until about the age 30 to get our bones as strong as possible. So osteopenia, for example, is softening of the bone. So it's sort of like a precursor to osteoporosis. So some people don't even, by the time they're 30, may or may not even get a full bone growth. So let's just say at age 30, you're at osteopenia. Somebody might go on to develop osteoporosis even before the age of 50, or if they're going into earlier menopause for various reasons, whether it's genetic or due to medication, there's various reasons. Osteoporosis can be brought on at a much earlier age. So it just doesn't happen at the age of 50. So it's discussing such things beforehand that's really key. So having these conversations with people at a younger age, and unfortunately, and this is human nature, unfortunately, having conversations with people at the age of 30 saying, get some bone health, and people don't realize it, and they don't think about it, and that's okay. That's human nature. But things like muscle loss, the conversations that we need to have with people, strength training and getting our muscles as strong as possible. There's various reasons why there's muscle loss, and it's not that the age of 50 that's the age. It's that there's hormonal shifts that are happening within people's bodies. But in addition to that, there's changes in lifestyle as well. So when you look at a person, we have to look at them in the big picture. So it's really important, to say, what are you doing every day? I mean, if you look at this past year and a half, a lot of people way under the age of 50 had a lot of muscle loss, where people over the age of 50 gained a lot of muscle. So it just depends on the lifestyle. So these conversations really need to be had. So it might be harder for somebody who's over the age of 50 to gain more muscle. It doesn't mean that it can't happen. Vitamin D is a different story. Vitamin D is a different ballgame, because whether or not a person has thinner skin, people need to protect themselves from the sun. And so we're talking about sunscreen. So, when you take a person and you put them out in the sun, if they're not protected, if they're at risk for skin cancer. But if they're protected, they're not going to get the vitamin D that their body needs. So supplementation, if their blood work shows signs of low vitamin D at any age, is really key. We learned a lot about the benefits of vitamin D way before this past year and a half. And this past year and a half, we learned even more about the benefits of vitamin D. So this is something that needs to be looked at a way younger age than 50. But in addition, once age 50 hits, the importance of knowing that your vitamin D levels are up to par, because that's when our disease risk increases anyway, whether it's certain cancers, as well as bone health, et cetera. That's when our vitamin D levels need to be at their peak for sure. So making sure that your blood work is being checked and that your vitamin D levels are at the correct level. If they're not, having a conversation with your healthcare provider, whether or not you need supplementation, is key. But then again, to your point that you mentioned, it's the absorption of that vitamin D that really matters as well.
Yeah.
A lot of us are having issues, stomach issues. There's so much IBS issues, irritable bowel, unexplained stomach issues, less stomach acid. Think about that. We're taking so many acid reducers, so many things to reduce acid in our system. Our body needs stomach acid to break down food. So if we think about that, that's an amazing concept. So if without that acid, how can we absorb something? So taking too many antacids might be counterproductive. So we have to look at the big picture of a person. So, what's going on? Is there stress going on? What's causing too much acid? And are there dietary changes that we can decrease the acid, not eliminate the acid? And if our skin is thinner, which it does happen, it is what it is. But do we need a vitamin D supplement? And for muscle loss, do we need to increase some type of strength training activity? Absolutely, 100%. And for osteopenia, osteoporosis, that's a whole program that needs to get an endocrinologist involved, strength training, exercises, bone health properly, a proper program for sure.
Very thorough, super thorough explanation of all these conditions. And I'm glad that you mentioned that a lot of other things besides just aging can affect all of these. So that's, and the fact that it can happen even earlier than 50, it's something that people need to take into consideration, like being able to see a nutritionist way further in advance, earlier in advance than most people think. That's definitely something people should consider. And what I've been seeing also is that as we get older, the way that like we just talked about with the stomach acid and not absorbing nutrients, we do need to supplement that nutrients either with dietary supplements or to get the proper food that would provide those nutrients on its own. Like it says right here, it's a focus on less of eating processed high calorie cholesterol fatty foods and more of things such as whole grain, fruits and veggies, seafood for the B12, and omega fatty acids, low fat dairy and legumes. So when we talk about mindful eating, we're talking about making sure that you're getting the nutrients from the food that you get. And with those nutrients, some of them are listed right here that I was able to find online. And those are the National Institute of Aging is a particularly great website to see exactly what nutrients are most common for that age group and earlier. And here's the link for that right here. And there's a really handy chart on it that shows key vitamins and minerals for people over age 51. And they, as you can see, we talked about certain vitamins like vitamin B12, calcium. They have the food source right here and the different amounts for both male and female older adults. So I think this is a really great resource for those people who don't really know where to get started, and for you to get some idea of what specific food sources you can get to supplement. For instance, if we look up potassium, you need to know how much potassium you need. You can do many different types of vegetables, including apricots, lentils, and potatoes. And even from sort of non-alcoholic beverages, you can obtain a certain amount of potassium. So just looking up simply that. I'm surprised that I don't see vitamin D on here, which is something that we were just speaking about. Oh, right here. Yep. Okay. So vitamin D, we were just talking about that. If you got thinner skin as you're older, and you can supplement that with either, a supplement that you get from a bottle, or you get more like fatty fish, oils, fortified milk products, and fortified cereals. So that's what we mean by mindful eating, or that's what I was trying to specify earlier. So I think this is a pretty extensive list of nutrients. And you can learn a lot more about the specific amounts, for instance, for ages 31 to 59 from what is known as the Dietary Guidelines for Americans, which is released by the US Department of Agriculture every 3 years. It does provide advice on what to eat and drink to meet nutritional needs, promote health, and prevent chronic disease. And what's notable about the recent editions is that they're including recommendations by life stage from birth to older adult. But our focus tonight is obviously for the adult range of 31 to 59. And from in that specific section, I'm just briefly highlighting what it says. You can certainly click this link in your own time and read for yourself. They specifically say that this is the amount required. 1600 to 2200. Now, the reason there's such a big range is that you need more calories if you have a more active lifestyle. But if you're mostly sedentary and don't work out often, this is the amount of calories that females or males require. And the emphasis for the intake is primarily dietary fiber and calcium and vitamin D for that specific age group. Erica, what do you think of these guidelines? Do you think they're pretty accurate, or can it apply to the majority of people that age, or is it you have to really be more specific for each person as to what they need?
Well, it's funny because if you think about that, more than 2/3 of the population is considered to be either overweight. Well, funny is not the right word, but it's ironic. If the stats tell us that more than 2/3 of the population is considered to be either overweight or obese, then these numbers wouldn't match up, because the recommendation would be that we would want that population, in order to be considered healthier, to go down in weight, to go down in their BMI, not necessarily to go from obese to overweight and overweight to go into the next category, which is called normal, which I don't particularly love that word because I think it's not positive. I think it's a little insulting, but that's a whole nother story. But so for that number, that 1600 to 2200, while it might be, or 2200 to 3000 might be the correct number when you're doing the math to give them what they need for their nutrient intake. If 2/3 of the population, let's just say, is looking to lose weight, to go down a category to improve their health status, let's just say, for argument's sake, they're taking in 4,000 calories a day. A male to go down to 2,200 from 4,000 is a very dramatic decrease. So that's a very uncomfortable feeling for a person for weight loss. They'll feel extreme hunger. So from a behavioral standpoint, as a dietitian, and I'm using this as an example, I typically wouldn't recommend for a person I wouldn't generalize and say, yes, a male requires of this height to have 2,200 calories if that person is currently taking in 4,000 and they want to lose weight. It would be a slow and steady process if that 2,200 is correct. So those numbers, while they are correct for the average person who is considered to be at a healthy weight, that is correct. For the population who is looking to or needing to, for health reasons or for personal reasons, wanting to lose weight to get into a healthier weight category, then those numbers, while they might be correct, I typically don't recommend a dramatic drop from what they're taking in currently to those numbers, if that makes sense.
No, I completely agree, because there's so much pressure on people to reach a certain number, certain BMI. And I think, I'm sure you know more about this. I know there's a lot of controversy around just the whole measurement of BMI in general when it comes to health. And I think a lot of stressors can be reduced when it comes to doing healthy eating and nutrition by just going at it at a slower pace, like you said, not dramatically to the point where it's going to be too much for someone and they're just going to resort to going back to unhealthy eating just to cope. So I totally understand. And sometimes just looking at the math, yeah, it's too general. I agree. And for that is why it's so great to have an actual dietitian here tonight, because that's exactly what you would tell a patient who comes into your office and tries to give you a certain number that they want to reach. So I think it's so helpful for people to hear that from an actual dietitian, that they shouldn't just go for that specific number. Yeah.
The numbers are, it's important that there are general numbers out there for guidelines, whether it's calories or vitamins or minerals and nutrients. And I understand that when interpreting them for a person's specific needs and how to get them in. So we use these numbers as guidelines. So when a doctor or your physician does blood work and measures, let's say vitamin D or whatever the blood work is showing, how to get those numbers to match what the dietary guidelines show is where the dietitian comes into play. And that's the important part, not to do it on your own.
Yeah.
You don't know what's being absorbed, how much of it is being absorbed, does it need to come from food, how much is coming from food, and is it realistic to get it from food versus when do you add in any kind of supplement at all.
And if we were going into the fitness portion right now, for this webinar, we're only focusing on nutrition, but obviously fitness has a huge impact on these numbers as well. But unfortunately, that's not the subject of tonight's webinar. And I'm glad now that I titled this slide recommended, because like you said, it's just a guideline, it's a starting point, but it's not what anybody should make as their specific goal. That is why dietitians and registered dietitians such as Erica are so important to consult with prior to making any lifestyle or dietary changes in your life. Well said.
Thank you.
So I have compiled some resources for people to investigate some more of these recommended guidelines and starting points. We have Medline Plus Nutrition for Older Adults. Medline Plus is a great free database for people. It's almost like I call it a gateway website, because as I will show you, it's a lot less confusing than Google. And Google, if you put in nutrition for older adults, and I say older adults because they just put in like everybody from about 30 to over 100 as an older adult, which I don't agree with, but this is what they label it as. As you can see already, and in comparison to a Google page for nutrition for older adults, there'd be billions of results. There'd be a lot of sponsored content right here. For here, you just, if you have a specific thing you want to look up, you just go directly down to it. So for starting here, you go to all these links that are linked to reliable websites, such as the National Institute of Aging, which I just briefly showed in the last slide. We've got the National Institute of Diabetes, Digestive and Kidney Diseases, just pointing you directly to where you need to be. And it always shows you that it was a recently added list. So very reliable, very easy to read. I always recommend this website to patients as opposed to just looking up on Google. We've got myplate.gov for adults, and I said the Institute of Aging and the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. This one in particular is very helpful in that not only can you look up articles that are peer reviewed by other dietitians, you can also look up fitness, and food recipes are also available on here. There's even a whole section on food safety, so you avoid the common condition of food poisoning, which can be upsetting to everyone. And then they also have a database for searching up registered dietitians, which I'm sure Erica would pop up right away. And if you looked up nutritionists in Greenwich, there's a database for you to look up dietitians in your area. Is there a website that you tell your patients, Erica, to look up information on? Is there the one you can add to the list, or are these the ones you kind of are aware of as well?
That's pretty much it.
Yeah, okay, I'm glad, because I'm glad I didn't miss anything. So I don't have time to go into all of them, but please take a look at them for yourselves. They're reliable, they've got great information, and it's a great starting point. But with regards to evaluating information online, I don't like to demonize Google entirely, because Google is very helpful in many cases, and it's a great way to access information that you would otherwise normally have to go to the library for and get a book back in the day. But there is it does take skill to be able to determine what websites on the internet are reliable and ones that are less reliable. And in that case, we have systems in place known as CRAAP. That's literally how it's pronounced, where you measure the currency, which is the timeliness of the information that was posted, the relevance of the information, the authority of the information. That's super important. That's where you go to a website and look at the about page and see if the information has been peer reviewed by, for instance, if we're talking about a nutrition website, you want to make sure that the people posting information on that website are registered dietitians such as Erica, who are certified to give information on that website. So authority is very important to look into when it comes to evaluating health information online. We also want to be sure of the accuracy of that information, the correctness of the content, the truthfulness. Basically, make sure that it is the right date. For instance, if there's something that's listed in 2015, it's 2021. You really want to find a website that has more updated information. For instance, I think when I went to library school, they told us that you shouldn't be providing information that's less than 5 years old, especially when it's health information. So those kind of things. And one of the first things you can look up when you're looking at a website is the web address. As you can see, there's different ways that their endings are. The .edu, .gov, .org, .net, and .com. The last three are the ones that people need to watch out for, because that is .com especially means that it belongs to a for-profit company, which means that they're most likely trying to sell you something. And the reason I put asterisks next to .org and .net are because people can actually purchase those domains as well with the intent of selling or persuading you about something, whether it be some kind of supplement product that hasn't been regulated by the FDA, or some kind of fitness program that isn't helpful but is still taking money from you if you sign up. So I would definitely go for any sort of web address that ends with .edu, because it is published by an organization that's associated with an educational institution. Examples like that can be Johns Hopkins University or Harvard Med. That I get a lot of patient educational info from those sites. .gov is anything like myplate.gov from the previous slide. It can also be anything created by the National Institute of Health. So Medline Plus is a database that's federal site. So those are just two examples. And for more information on evaluating health resources, we also have a very great guide on my website. There's a whole list of things you can use to educate and practice doing this, because it is a skill, evaluating stuff online and being sure that you don't get misled. I personally suggest this trust it or trash it worksheet as you have a site up in front of you, you can just go through all these questions and be sure of its accuracy and reliability with something like this. For instance, this is a picture that I got from MyPlate for older adults. That's from the website, myplate.gov. And it does specify the amount, basically it has a great image. It's a visual imagery of how much of a certain food group you should have on your plate. And as you can see, the fruits and veggies take up the most portion of your plate, while something like dairy and grains should be of minimal quantity. Erica, would you potentially use this as a visual aid for a patient, or do you think there needs to be something, again, it's too general, like there's always something more specific for everybody?
I love the generalization of it. In addition to this, similar to a label on a product, I tend to say these are great. They need to come attached with a dietitian.
Yeah,
To
exactly.
say this is great, but I mean, that looks to me like a lot of food. It's very hard for the average person to interpret that on their own.
That is true. Yeah, it's especially since it doesn't have any, but like you said, there's no numbers associated with it, which I like about that. But it's almost a little bit too overwhelming for someone. So I agree. So, but it's a good aid to show what's at least more important to include on your plate, which is more veggies and fruits above any other kind of food group, from what I understand. Correct?
I miss the old pyramid.
You do? Oh, wow. I haven't heard many dietitians say that, because wasn't the old pyramid, the one on the bottom was all grains? Like that was the biggest food group for people?
Yeah, but you know, if you think about the way that the numbers of health and disease have changed over the years, and if you look at the trajectory of weight and disease has increased, and I'm not sure how this has helped. So it doesn't make sense to me.
Oh, that's a really interesting perspective. I kind of just go by my plate, but clearly it's dietitians that we need to consult. Like you said, it may be too general for the everyday person, and it really depends on how average they consider someone. Everybody's of different sizes and all that. So
Most people would say, wasn't it grains on the bottom, but most people would visualize that or interpret that as carbs, cookies, cakes, crackers. They lump everything together, so it's the old pyramid, and then looking at weight and disease and how things have changed. I'm not sure how the new MyPlate has aided in that. So just my opinion.
It's an interesting one. So in the meantime, MyPlate, of course, is something this is something you can access from the myplate.gov website. Take a look for yourself and then consult a dietitian. That is the process. And now we have for finding healthy recipes, for those of us who do not know where to turn, if we're thinking, oh, if we want to start healthy eating, what are some ways we could start? So I have some book recommendations and some website recommendations. I briefly showed you what the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics website looks like, but I'll show you how the recipe section looks like. We'll just load right here. Okay, so you can get to recipes through going to the food part, planning and prep, and it'll take you to the recipe section right here. So for instance, we have this easy migas recipe. And if you just click on the article, it'll bring you to the article, and it'll show you the ingredients involved, the directions. and any type of nutritional information that comes with it, including calories, total fats, saturated fats, and even the nutrients, the amount of the protein you'll get, the potassium, and the phosphorus, which, as we talked about earlier, is really important if you need to supplement something in your diet. And we talked about evaluating online resources. We have the name of the person that provided this nutritional information, their location, as well as their credentials. So again, that's how we know that something like this is accurate, as opposed to a recipe that you find on Google through some person's blog. So that's one example of a recipe on this page. We also have on myplate.gov, I'll show you how the recipes look there. That's where I got that image of the plate. And what I like about this website is that you can be really specific on what you program it. So a nutritional focus, you can select recipes that have more calcium, for instance. So if we click here, let it load, they display everything right here. And it'll even take into account the amount of money you might have to spend to make this recipe, because we know that healthy eating can sometimes be a drag on people's budgets. So I like that this particular website takes that in consideration when recommending recipes. They go through courses, the food groups, the equipment that you might need to use. Just it's very, very specific for people. So I like that instead of being general like some websites are or guidelines, they take into account the individual needs. And I do have this particular book right in front of me, Food and Fitness After 50. Just with regards to books and websites for books, you need to make sure that the author is a certified dietitian. As you can see right here, it says PhD, RDN, Christine Rosenblum. I've heard great things about this book. I will be including it in my library's collection if anyone wants to borrow it once visitor guidelines are less restrictive. And I do have a collection of cookbooks that you can look into. I actually got this cookbook from the reading list from eatright.org, which is the site that I just showed the recipe from. So yeah, so you can see this list is from Eat Right, the March 2020 list, so very recent, just last year. So lots of categories: academic publications, books that are focused specifically on diabetes, sports nutrition, nutrition and lifestyle. And as you can see, it is from the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics from 2019. So if there's any interest in any of these books, you can definitely take a look and get it from either a local library near you, or if you come by the hospital when it's less restrictive visitor wise, you can borrow it from the collection that the medical library provides. Erica, is there any books that you would recommend to any patients? Do you have a collection yourself?
No, these are great. These, you have a great resource here. So terrific.
I appreciate that. I would show you my favorite site, which is foodhero.org, but unfortunately, there's a firewall on the hospital's computer that won't let me show it. But it is reliable. It's got the .org, and it has not just recipes for adults, it has recipes for kids, so that you can encourage your children to become more nutritiously minded by being more involved in the kitchen. So that's primarily why I recommend it, because it even specifies it down to how long it takes to actually make it. There is a section in there that literally tells you, oh, this recipe will only take 30 minutes and is still healthy, because I know that cooking time can be an obstacle for people when it comes to eating healthier. So this is something that you would be able to tell us. When it comes to searching up a nutritionist or a nutrition program near you, these are some resources that I found to see an RDN, as opposed to following some influencer that's online. There are some people on TV or on the internet that will claim that they are, certified, but they call themselves diet counselors and nutritionists to avoid anyone looking into their credentials. Erica, maybe you can tell us a little bit of why seeing a RDN or registered dietitian is really important for people.
An RDN or a registered dietitian nutritionist is somebody who carries a license. They've gone through a very, very long education process and a licensing process, exams, a licensing exam as well, and are licensed by the state in which they're practicing as well. Anybody can call themselves a nutritionist, a counselor, an expert. I don't call myself an expert in anything. I don't want to be an expert. I want to keep learning. I always say I don't want to be the smartest person in the room. I want to keep learning. So you want to look for somebody who has had the proper training and licensing. That is really important, and seeing the RD or RDN after that person's name is really, really important. There are some certifications. Health coaching has become very popular, and there are some health coaching certifications. There are people who can, there are also some within certain industries, in the fitness industry specifically, there are some levels of or certain amounts of education that fall within their scope of practice. General conversations about eating certain fruits and vegetables, basic things. When it comes to specific disease conversations, looking for information from a licensed registered dietitian is really important to do. So it's very challenging as a dietitian because we are up against a lot of media influence, and it's a challenge. People look for, and I don't blame them, people look for a quick fix to, and it's not just about weight loss, but a quick fix to improved health, whether it be fighting disease prevention, what nutrition can do for your hair or for your skin. And the truth is that with nutrition changes, things take a long time. And I always say the return on investment when making nutrition changes is very, it takes a very long time. But that's how you know that it's working, and that's how you know it will be a permanent change. And that's what you learn from a registered dietitian. Anything that happens fast, anything that happens too quickly falls into that category. If it's too good to be true, then you know that the source usually is not the most reliable.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that's the first thing that came to mind. If it's too good to be true, then it usually is. And what I think what you said about RDNs, like getting the full picture, not just of what you want to achieve, but what is your current state of health to begin with, so that you know the process to which to achieve their goals eventually, not right away, but eventually. But that's why I tend to try to recommend resources other than Google for people, because Google will immediately accompany those searches that you make with a lot of sponsored things, a lot of commercial products. The first thing that comes to life is something called Herbalife. I've been seeing that in commercials. I've been seeing that online. It's a smoothie or some kind of drink that promises that you'll lose weight in like 2 weeks if you follow the regimen that they provide, which is super unrealistic to begin with. But also that whole website does not have any RDNs or RDs listed as part of their medical advisory board or any of the people that are involved with it. So that is why it's so important to look up links such as these from the coloradostate.edu. They tell you about how to identify fraud and misleading claims online. And Like I said before, the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics has a nutrition expert database. You just put in your address and it pulls up all the certified RDNs in your area. Oh, look, we have a question. So we have a question from our audience. Thank you. She is asking, what is the latest recommendation for the number of eggs you can consume per day? That's interesting. Do you want to take that, Erica?
It's a great question. So for anyone who has a history of high cholesterol, the general recommendation is 2 to 3 yolks a week. If there is not a history of any cholesterol issues at all, there really is no limitation. Is there anything more specific that you want to ask? Please feel free. It's a general answer to your question. So please feel free to ask more if you need to know more or want to know more.
I think that's really interesting to say, because I think like every year it kind of fluctuates. Like there's a headline that says, oh, eating eggs is bad for you now. And then another headline will say, oh, eating eggs is actually great for you. So I guess in general, like in your medical opinion, eggs are a healthy source of protein and should be consumed, or people should lower their intake?
So when I look at in my experience, if a person has high cholesterol, there's one of two reasons why. There's a genetic influence, meaning that the person makes too much cholesterol in their system. And that being said, there's a very strong reason why they should limit their intake of the yolk itself. The yolk is where the saturated fat and the cholesterol is. And in addition to that, most likely that person would be also on a statin drug, something to help lower that cholesterol, because that person dietary changes is not enough when it's genetically, the cause is genetics. But dietary changes in addition to the statin drug is really important. The other reason why cholesterol levels can be high is overall dietary intake. Now, that being said, when I look at a person's overall dietary intake, and without sounding too crass, 99% of the time, it's not their egg yolk intake that's the cause of their high cholesterol. Nutritionally speaking, it's not because they're having 10 yolks a week. It's generally high in saturated fat from fried foods, from junk food. There's a whole host of other foods that they're taking in. And, 2 to 3 yolks per week can help to decrease that. But, one of the things that we have to look at as dietitians is starting from where that person is. So, yolks aren't the be all end all. It's not the cause. It's not the reducer. Of cholesterol, we have to look at the big picture.
Exactly. And the same person is also asking now, what is the recommended amount of fat-free milk per day for someone who is over 70 years old? So now they're moving on to a different food group.
So we're looking at about 1,200 to 1,500 milligrams of calcium per day. And that comes to about, so you have to look at how much calcium you're taking in per day. And I'm just checking. So if you're looking at 2 to 3 servings of dairy per day, or if you're taking calcium supplements. So if the question is regarding calcium, that's where we're going. So that's 2 to 3 servings of dairy per day, but I don't know if you're getting in yogurt also, if you're getting in cheese as well. And I'm not sure about the absorption. So there's a whole host of other things that we have to look at also.
Yeah, so like we said, it's not a general, you can have a general estimate, but it's important to know the person first. And For the general estimates, however, I do have a great pamphlet from the National Institute of Aging. I don't know how to show this through the thing, but it's called What's on Your Plate? Smart Food Choices for Healthy Aging. And it does have a chart in here of different amounts or equivalents of a certain nutrient or a certain food group based on the amount of calories that somebody's looking to lose. So for instance, you can have the equivalent of 3 cups of dairy if you're eating at a 1600 calorie level, for instance. That's what this chart says. So somebody could look at this chart and know where that's kind of like what the baseline is. That's what the recommended guideline is. But again, a dietitian such as Erica should get to know the bigger picture about an individual's, dietary needs before making that kind of specific suggestion.
So I can be reached. I'll give you my number at my department. I have to sign up.
Yeah, so I have her email right here. Is this good for people to contact you with?
Yep.
Okay, great. So
And
that's
also the best way to reach is through our department's phone number as well, which is 203, yes, down
This
there,
one? Yep.
863-2939.
Okay, great. So that's that number or your email. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I know
Thank
you have to
you.
go, but this has been very informative and I'm glad you were able to answer some questions on top of it. So
I
thank you so much.
appreciate it. Have a good night.
Yep, you too. And
Bye.
we do have a few more slides, but for now, we're just gonna let Erica go. Okay, yep, so just a few more slides, everybody. It's just a few more resources that I want to recommend. It's on, these are some great resources to look up for food safety. The 4 steps of food safety are usually to make sure your area is clean, that you separate your meats from your vegetables, and that you cook at a certain temperature and you chill and store properly and in the right places. So these are the 2 links that I would give: foodsafety.gov and the CDC's page on food safety. And as we were talking about earlier, the internet is full of scams and misleading information, especially when it comes to nutrition. So I could not find a better resource than the consumer information source, The Truth Behind Weight Loss Ads. We have a whole section on Medline Plus about herbs and supplements, or the Office of Dietary Supplements. So you avoid the commercial products that aren't FDA regulated, and you go to these sites instead to see what is regulated, what has been studied, and to see what exactly is reliable for you to use. And we have even a section on nutrition.gov about popular diets. So if somebody's telling you to go keto, somebody's telling you to go paleo, talk to your dietitian first about that before actually engaging in that, because a lot of people try these diets, they get frustrated, doesn't really work for a specific person. Not everybody can just pick up keto and get rid of the carbs that they usually eat. So this is a really good resource to just look into what each diet is about and why it may not work for everyone. And as Erica pointed out, she does work for the Center for Nutritional Behavioral Health. These are the conditions that they offer treatments for. They have nutritional counseling, they have mental health counseling to help create behavioral habits that'll help make eating healthier easier. And this is the number to call if you'd like to schedule an appointment. You can schedule an appointment with multiple RDs in there, but you can specifically request Erica Christ if you liked what she had to say tonight. So thank you so much for joining tonight. I think it was a really great webinar. Erica is such a great lady to speak with, very informative, very easy to understand. You can register for more free and upcoming webinars such as tonight's at Greenwich Hospital's events page or by calling the number on the screen. I will be posting a recording of this webinar sometime tomorrow on my website. And I do have a YouTube page on the Greenwich Hospital's YouTube page and on Greenwich Hospital's Facebook page. It will be posted there as well, but this is where it's going to be posted tomorrow because I should have the recording link by tomorrow. So on your handout, you click on here and you'll be able to share this recording with your friends, or if someone you know like couldn't make it tonight, you can just go to that. And once again, we have Erica Chris's email and also my email for anybody who would like to have it on hand. So unless there's any other questions for tonight, we are going to conclude, I believe. So any other questions tonight from any of the remaining attendees? All right, so I think this is like the first time I actually finished within the hour. So I think let's not test the luck here. So we're going to conclude for tonight. So again, thank you everyone who has stayed. Thank you for Erica to join us, and have a great night.